Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. This is the podcast where we chase the truth wherever it runs, picking up from where we started on our sermons on Sunday and just going wherever it goes. And this is episode number 160.
160.
Brent is back.
Yeah.
And we are, this is number 160, guys. We're 40 away from 200.
160.
Jacob and I were talking before you guys got in here, and that's like almost 3 years, right, that we've done this.
That's
It's over 3 years, right?
Mm.
And I mean, over 3 years from when we started. I think we started in January.
Yeah, January.
3 years
oh,
ago.
gosh. You're making us feel old, Brent.
I know. I know.
But we are glad that you guys are joining with us. And if you are new, welcome. You're jumping in on a long conversation. Our podcast has a ton of different ideas, tons of different things. You can go back into our archives, see all kinds of conversations from the book of Exodus, from the book of First Peter, and just lots of Bible stuff, lots of apologetics questions, lots of that kind of stuff, because we really do just love to chase that truth wherever it runs. And if you are interested in getting to know more, then just join us, plug in, keep going with us. We're glad you're with us. And my fellow rabbit chasers, you guys ready to run down those trails? Let's do this.
Yeah. My name is Stephen Oldham. I'm the local outreach pastor here at Olive Branch. And thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe, and make sure you hit the bell if you wanted to get those updates. But more importantly, if you could share it with other people. And if you're listening to us on Apple iTunes, make sure you share that and also subscribe there and let other people know about the podcast.
And my name is Brent Branchard. I'm the Connections Pastor here at Olive Branch Church. And again, we would love to hear your feedback. We would love to read your questions and discuss them. And you can send them to us by email at rabbittrail@obcc.church, rabbittrail@obcc.church.
He repeats even himself.
Yes, we will get those. We will read them and appreciate them. And I just wanted to say I wasn't here last week. My dad passed away, and I just want to thank everybody for their love, their cards, their well wishes. It really meant a lot for our family and your prayers as well. So greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.
That's awesome.
Yes. And so,
Sorry,
I mean, just if anybody's interested, our family is doing well as we could be. I know, like for me last night, I just had a big bowl of alphabet soup. And then I had a nice vowel movement this morning. Oh.
That's not even a Bible joke.
Oh, it's not.
About pivoting.
Wow.
Yeah, somebody hit me up.
My heart was like, where are we at suddenly?
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Soup, comfort food in a time like this.
Oh.
A vowel movement? Oh, Brent, you're horrible. But yes, I am. Thank you.
You just suckered us in with your father's death to tell a bad joke.
No, those were two separate things. But
they didn't feel like it. So
Yeah,
I think that's
I
what
know.
Stephen was experiencing.
I had some whiplash.
yeah, but that's the way I roll. Whiplash.
Glad. So anyway, we've made a decision that, considering the new conversation out there on what's called brain rot, we're just going to pass by the brain rot scrolling for this week, and Stevens can save some of his brain power for our conversation from the sermon.
It's writing enough as it
And
is.
we're also going to try to knock out the rest of those junior high questions, the 5th, 6th grade questions.
Not the rest of them, because there's like 17 questions.
Oh, come on. We can do this. We'll do lightning round.
We'll do a lightning round.
Yes.
then.
No.
I got a feeling we won't have time for 17 question lightning round.
Who, us?
Yeah.
We answer questions so quickly, though.
I know. And
3
not only that,
hours
we
later.
always go, we don't have a lot to talk about today. And then an hour and 20 minutes in, we're like, okay, wrap it up.
All right. Well, let's get started. What are we looking at?
Well, we are still in the series Simon Says, which
Simon
is
Says.
from the point of view of Peter. We're going through the book of Matthew.
Well,
we're not going through the book, but
They're
the
jumping
passages,
around looking for Simon.
which is just confusing. Simon Says from the perspective of Peter, and we're going to Matthew. So
It's kind of like Where's Waldo, but Where's Simon?
I'm telling you, yeah, there's
Everybody remembered what Simon said.
It is cute. It is confusing. So we're going through the passages, Matthew chapter 17, verses 24 through 27, and it was pertaining to temple tax, and that's a passage where they were.
Everybody knows the temple tax passage, Brent. Do you really need
I could read it right now. So 17:24. And when they came to Capernaum, and that would be Jesus and the disciples, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, does your teacher not pay the tax? And he said, yes. Is that yes, he doesn't pay the tax, or yes, he does pay the tax?
Yeah, that wasn't a double. Does your teacher not pay the tax? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
My teacher does not pay the tax.
Yeah.
Wait, yes, my teacher does. That's a Bible translation faux pas right there. That's awesome.
So it's one of those things where whatever makes you angry, think of the opposite. So, but no, yes. So he says yes. And then when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, what do you think, Simon? From who do the kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others? And when he said, from others, Jesus said, then the sons are free. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open the mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself. And a shekel is like 4 denarii, right? Is that right?
Yeah, it's...
So anyway, it would have covered the taxes for both of them.
Here's I love this. We're joking around about that double negative translation. I like how the net puts it a little cleaner. They say, your teacher pays the double drachma tax, doesn't he? And he said, yes. So
Yes.
it's like
I liked
the double negative is kind of like confusing there.
I liked, because Matt was the one preaching this weekend, and I liked his take on that. Was like, he just like wonders, this isn't scriptural. Yeah. It's just his perception. It's like when he said yes, was it like, yes, I think so, or was it yes, he does, So I thought that was kind of fun. I liked his Homer Simpson getting into the hedges, disappearing into the hedges.
I just like Pinocchio when I may or may not in the Shrek movies when they're asking.
I may or may not know that he's not or is not at another place where he could.
They're interrogating
when he was.
That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
So that's funny right there. But basically Jesus was saying, and he in the sermon too, he mentioned that Jesus laid out a case why he didn't have to pay taxes. He was a rabbi; they were exempt. He was living in poverty and just living on the graces of other people, and so he was exempt.
And this is just that temple tax. Notice they don't call these guys. When they came to Capernaum, the tax collectors. No, these are the collectors of the 2 drachma tax. They're not the same tax collectors of Rome, which they were hated. These were liked. Yeah. So,
but they did kind of the same thing with the when the tax collectors came by, who's this? Should we pay taxes? Whose face is on this coin?
Yep.
So he always did what was right. In the grand scheme of things.
But it does lead to a question because Jesus ends up paying that tax, right?
So he doesn't have to.
He's this guy who's trying, and what he says is, let's not offend. They're free, but in order not to give offense to them, not to stumble somebody.
Yeah.
Go and do this thing we'll talk about in a minute. But I think this is just, I'll phrase the question, and Brent and Stephen, you guys can jump in. But I liked how we were talking about it. It's like, when is it right to not give offense, and when is it that you should give offense? Because there are times where Jesus does, and Matt kind of challenged us. Like, there are times he just straight up says something to somebody and
it's
challenges
highly
them,
offensive,
and it offends the Pharisees. This time he's like, let's not give offense on this one. Like, what do you got? What's the difference? And how would you know? How do you know when it's really time to like challenge someone? And not like, I think Stephen, you were bringing up the issues like, when is it time to tell that non-Christian to stop that pot smoking and cussing, and when is it time to like go, I'm not going to worry about that right now. You got bigger issues to fry. Or
yeah, I think this takes a while. I mean, there are many passages that talk about the mature and immature brothers in Christ as well. So those passages would apply here, but I think it has to do with something I like to call spiritual triage, where
spiritual triage. This is like something that happens in medical world, right?
Yeah, and psychology. Like, so if someone has a series of issues that's presenting to them, well, let's just go with the medical one. They're in a car accident, right? And they have all kinds of wounds, and you run up and you go, ugh, foot fungus. Yeah, you should take care of that. And meanwhile, he's got a gaping chest wound, right? And you're sitting there concerned about the small area, maybe he may lose his foot. I don't know how bad the fungus is.
Fast acting to acting.
But right now, what's probably the most important are the life-threatening ones that are closer to the heart or closer to the head, the ones that have to deal with real issues that might be vital to their ability to see spiritually. So
you need to be able to have wisdom.
You have to have wisdom
about like what's the real serious problem here? What's the fruit of the problem and what's the actual root of the problem?
I would say salvific concerns should take precedence when you're talking with people. The amount of time you have, if you have, I wouldn't always hit them up with salvation right away. If it is just a like if you're saying like, oh, you have foot fungus, you came to my house, you might die tomorrow if you don't get that foot fungus. Like, hey, wait a minute, I just barely met you. So there's also the opposite of that as well. If you have more time with people who have longer setting problems, you might want to get used to seeing what your relationship is like in that situation. But in an emergency scenario, when it's dealing with something that I do think is effective to the heart, then you should be willing to offend. It does hurt when you're trying to mend someone's chest wound. It's going to hurt them. It's going to cause them discomfort, and it may make them angry at you. And so all the medical professionals have to deal with all of these issues, being punched and all this stuff. And so that is a concern even for the Christian. So you have to know what really matters to God, and what if, even though it's an inconvenience and you have a right to not do it, is it beneficial and helpful to the overall salvation of the individual that you're talking with? If you're going to fix their cussing situation and you don't really know them very well, you don't really have a relationship, and it's not going to lead to a further fruitful conversation. It's just you're annoyed with them. I don't know how helpful that is. So that's kind of how I look at it.
And as I'm thinking through this, number one, I don't want this to sound overly spiritual, like
Why?
overly spiritualize this question. But also, I think that, number one, allow the Holy Spirit to guide you. And I think be prayerful in all things.
What does that look like?
So, if you want to like make an argument about something, I think, you need to ask yourself a couple of questions. I mean, number one, Robert. No, Stephen,
You're gonna call me Robert.
Stephen, you mentioned mature and immature Christianity, but also a haughty spirit versus a humble spirit when approaching and talking to people as well. And then just, is this coming from the flesh or is this coming from the spirit? And it kind of just, we're doing in our small group, we're going through Samuel, and we were looking at Saul at that point of losing his kingship, and Samuel was sent to Jesse's house to talk to his sons. And so part of it is like, when you're reading the story, it sounds like Samuel's ready to anoint that first son. He's gorgeous, he's big, he's strong, and then God's like, whoa, no, not him. Okay, the next one. Okay, I'm ready to go. No, not him. So again, when you kind of look at that whole story where the people were screaming for a king, and God is like warning them, you don't want this.
Yeah.
You don't want this. I'm your king, and a king is going to do this and this and this and this and this and these horrible things. And, and they're like, we want one. And so there was really no like, let's pray about this. Let's seek God in this. It was like, this is what we want to do.
In fact, they're talking to the guy who would seek God for them, and they weren't even listening to him.
Yeah. You're like, well, what does God think of this, Samuel? They're just like, this is what we want.
So when because Brent, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, because in your life, I've known you. You've walked a long journey. Speaking of your dad, you walked a long journey in trying to remove obstacles for him, and you found, I think we both agree that over the years it did help move him closer to Christ, but you weren't actually the one that got to kind of lead him over the line in that sense.
My sister.
Yeah. And so, there's been other moments. I know that you've been in like, I don't remember who you were talking to, but you were in the car and you were just like, you just straight up went straight for the hell card, and it like totally rocked their world. So what was the difference in those two approaches for you? Why did you take one with your dad one way and the other in the car? Do you want to tell those two stories real quick?
Yeah. Well, first, and I'm sure I've shared this, so I'm not going to go totally into detail, but my dad was not a Christian. He was basically an agnostic or atheist, not not
angry,
not divisive in that. I mean, he went to church with my mom for years and years, volunteered at the church all the time.
He was just disinterested.
Yeah, he just could not believe in God, and so part of it was, I said, hey, let's meet, let's talk. I'll show you why I believe this is reasonable to believe. You can bring up, what your arguments, and I'll try to answer them. So I will say, when I did deal with my dad, I was trying to convince him, and I thought if I could just convince him mentally, then he's going to have to give his life to the Lord. And so I will say I wasn't that good with my dad. I mean, we didn't argue. It wasn't an argument. It was a good conversation. But there were times where I would talk to him and I could see this light go on in his head. Like, oh, that makes sense. There's this connection, right? So I would call my mom and I'm like, Mom, you need to talk to Dad. You need to like push this issue with him. And she's like, I'm not, I am not going to say anything to your dad. I'm going to let that just be you and his thing. And I just don't want to pressure him. I want to let the Spirit move. So my mom was the gracious one in that, where she was just like, I'm going to just trust God that he will, and I'll just keep praying for dad, but I'm not going to confront him and try to push him over the edge,
right. And so then there's
but then the other one was was Nancy's nephew's wife, and so they're adults, and we were driving somewhere, and they were claiming they were partiers, they were partiers and everything else, and had foul language and everything else, and we're driving to see a play at the Pantages in Hollywood, and she mentioned that they were Christians, and I just went, wow, how come you don't act like it? Okay, I will say this. In that, I absolutely do not remember that conversation at all. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this dig right here, and it's going to, it's going to fester in her. And no, it was just, I just made a sarcastic joke comment. And I will say, I often say, sarcasm is my spiritual gift. So it's my fruit of the Spirit. I haven't found that in Scripture.
Sarcasm here.
I haven't quite found that in Scripture yet. But
Elijah.
Oh no, there's plenty of sarcasm in the Bible.
So I do felt like that God used a sarcastic joke that was a total throwaway for me, because I absolutely do not remember that at all. I don't even remember her reacting to it. So. And then they went back to Florida, and it just stuck in her mind, and she gave her life to Christ. So it wasn't a thing where I had two different approaches, but again, kind of like going back to that Samuel story, I think that there are times to move forward and push forward. But seek the Lord in those things. Not.
I think what was interesting for me was like, okay, so because this just happened 2 days ago. I had somebody come into our church who has a background in another religion, and as I was, he was just wanting to know more about Jesus, wanting to know, and just like he knew some things. He'd been around Christians and stuff, but just really wanted to know more about Jesus. And as I started going through it, I'm like, I felt like, I'm the pastor. I don't even know where to begin in all this, because it wasn't a formula. Like, I'm not just going to bust out the track and just start going with him. He was wrestling over, like, how do I know that Jesus is God? How do I know that the Bible is true? And so, like, I started with Genesis and sin and stuff like that, and I could tell that wasn't, like, there was something about his, like, expression that wasn't going well. And so I just would ask another question, like, so, like, then, I get this if this is saying Jesus is God, you're saying, like, how in the world is that, do I trust the Bible? And he's like, yeah. And so I was trying to, what my thing was, I'm trying to surface, what's the real question?
Yeah, you're triaging.
Yeah, what's the real issue? And so we wound up going back to Isaiah chapter 53 and just laying out, and I told him, look, this actually, we have a document that is 200 years older than Jesus. It's dated to prior to the time of Jesus' life, and this is word for word. This is like amazingly accurate. And as I was reading it to him, he was just blown away. Like, God used that and just woke him up. He's like, this is here. Why is it that people don't believe this thing is from God? Like, it was just so obvious to him. And from there, it just led to him actually asking, like, what can I do? What can I do right now to be forgiven? And I was just like, what in the world? Did I just fall into the book of Acts? This is incredible. But what was beautiful about it for me was there have been other moments in my life where I'm sitting across from a young teenager or something, and they were just so arrogant about their position. I'm trying to explain. It feels a lot like instead of the internet, it was just an actual conversation.
That was actual Facebook.
Yeah, a real face-to-face book. And so and what was weird was I wasn't getting any traction because I couldn't get to the real. He wasn't really curious. He doesn't really want. He just wanted to debate. And so at that point, I just would tie him into his own position. He got mad at me. He's like, I'm like, you're the one who are saying, I'm not saying those things. I'm like, these are your words, and this is the conclusion of your words. That's not how that works. I'm like, yes, it is. And I hated doing that. But there's a point at which I had to offend him with his own stuff. And I think that's what you see Jesus do. Jesus will take what you give him, and he'll just toss it back at you. You know, oh, you guys want to be all these obedient people, but hey, you whose fathers stoned the prophets, and now you build the tombs for them and make them beautiful, affirming that you're the ones who did this very thing, right? There's something in that connection for Jesus where he's like, you're affirming they're dead, and you're trying to make yourself feel better by making these things look good. No, that's not how you get off this. You should listen to the prophets, not make their tombs look good. And so you're just doing the same thing because you don't want to listen to the prophets. Just like you're just affirming their deaths, not actually doing the work. And so he often will take that thing you give him, and he's like, you don't want to listen to me? I'll give it back to you. And I think in those cases, Jesus is willing to offend when he knows that you are unwilling to listen. In a case like this, I think, where he's like, I'm not willing to offend here because this is going to become unnecessary, an unnecessary debate. It's not going to be helpful. It's going to lead us down, should I say this, rabbit trails that we don't need to go. And some people out there going like, yes, Greg, listen to yourself. There are rabbit trails you don't need to go down. But okay. So I do think this is interesting as you work with non-Christians and work with people who are even growing in their faith, is to ask those solid questions that are helping unveil, hey, this is really what they're struggling with. The second thing, I agree. And that would be triage. That's kind of what I hear you saying is triage. And then I would agree that you stay prayerful. And I didn't feel like I was prompted by the Spirit on anything, but it felt like I was kind of in this tension where I was guarding this desire to make something happen and allow the Lord to work and try to notice where he was headed. And I think that asking questions and trying to stay curious helped me, not just curious about him, but when I'm curious about him, I'm curious to what is the Lord doing in him. I can't know what the Lord's doing in him, but he can by expressing it, and then I can help lead that. And so I think that's how the prompting of the Spirit comes across for me in those cases, is by trying to see what the Lord's actually doing in the person, so that I know, okay, go in this direction, or I know this is a time to offend, etc. So,
well, sometimes when you're talking to people, I think it's helpful to ask clarifying questions and try to listen. And if you are praying, you want to pray for Lord, what really is the issue here, because you don't always know. So if people present to you an option, and you find out later through the conversation, through your relationship, that's not really what's going on. But sometimes God will ask you to walk through that logic or through that obstacle just so that they can see it, even if you can't. So some people don't have the patience to do that. I'll give you an example. For me, I was in the Air Force. We did a lot of outreach and stuff, and there was a guy who gave his life to the Lord the night before, but then he got orders to go to South Korea. And in South Korea is party time, right? You get the women, and you get they have their weird kind of culture there. The guys like to kind of go there and party up. And then all of a sudden lo and behold, he had all these Bible questions that came. Well, how do you know Jesus is this? And how do you know Jesus is that? And everybody was talking to him like, let's sit down and talk to him. Steve was like, okay. I said, look, I'm going to answer all your questions, but I got a question when you're done, And so we went through all the questions about Buddhism and all this. Okay. So are you just looking for excuses not to believe in God because you want to go to Korea? He goes, yes. I go, well, then don't lie to yourself or to me or anyone else. I'll answer all your questions, but know that your motive is to do what you want.
And then there's and that your judgment is greater at that point.
Yeah. And so to me, at first it was, I am going to kindly entertain all of these what I consider to be foolish questions because they're just nonsense. You don't really want the answers to them. And I do see this kind of approach sometimes that Christ will use. Hey, why do you call me good? You know, he's talking about the rich young ruler. No, didn't the Bible say no one's? He's not saying, and he's not even making statements about himself. He's just bringing more conversation back and forth to the argument to get to the heart of the real issue. He makes this guy walk through this whole process, and then the guy at the end figures out, oh, that is my problem. Sometimes we don't see our own problems, so you have to really look at someone, pray while you're praying for them. Pray, Lord, what really would bring fruit to their life? I may or may not know, but I'm going to ask a series of questions. But then I'm not afraid to say what really is going on.
And I think this is why, and not to knock our segment where we talk about things from the internet, but I really don't think these kinds of conversations are as fruitful online. I'm not going to say they're never fruitful because I'm sure there have been plenty of times where
people come to the Lord through them.
Yeah, the Lord has worked greatly. But I am going to say they are much harder to have online than they are in a personal, because you're a personal conversation. I'm missing out on the body language. I'm missing out on the context. I can't get a direct response immediately without, in the sense of like just saying, hey, like, why do you really want to know this? Like, we had somebody who's been commenting on, the divinity of Jesus. I'm not so sure in the way that they commented whether they really want us to answer the questions.
Right.
They just they think they're trying to make points snarkily, like challenge but I'm like, if I answered your question, I don't think that you have ears to hear, and therefore should I even attempt? And that's the kind of question that we have to weigh those things. Like, why do you really want to know? Why are you really wanting to say this?
I don't think the environment in Jesus' time was much different. They didn't have a line. It's probably worse now because it's instantaneous to our emotions, to our mouth, to outside to everyone else because of the internet. But back then, they're trying to catch Jesus all the time in this honor-shame culture, trying to bring him down with a question. And Jesus is entertaining their questions, but sometimes he's just like, this is not important. This is important. I don't need to engage. I do need to engage because he has like a clear mission of what he's trying to accomplish. I want to make sure that my Father's mission is clear, and I don't want to be off being distracted in areas that aren't going to lead people in that direction.
Are you impressed with how he managed it? I'm always impressed with how
he's like a genius to me. I mean, especially when you start looking at, scribes, Pharisees. Yeah. But I mean, like, you could see it in the text. So the way he answers ancient argumentations from Leviticus or Deuteronomy or from the Torah, we just kind of read through the surface, and then that's why people pepper it with all these questions. We're reading our own world into the context. But if you got into the ancient world and how they debated and what they talked about and all the things they're bringing up to Jesus, he's aware of what's going on, and he's answering their questions, and he's making
mind-blowingly.
And they're just
incredible.
like, oh, Jesus, I can't stand it. It's just they're getting madder and madder because they don't win an argument with him. And they always end up having to look inside themselves for the questions. And then also they walk away looking slightly foolish. And he's not seeking these out to do these unless he feels like it's going to draw people to the Lord. In fact, sometimes he's seeking to get away from being quote unquote online. He discontinues. I need to be alone with my Father. I need to get clear in what the Father has and spend time with him. And so to me, I think that's a really clear example because there is a culture that is really into debate at the time of Jesus. And Jesus is right stuck in the middle of it, calling himself a rabbi. So
one of the things
or allowing people to call him that.
One of the things I see in this too, in the fact of whether or not you're offending somebody or whether or not you argue with somebody about something, I think the thing to keep in mind, and you kind of mentioned it, I would argue when you said I wasn't really being prayerful about it. I was just trying to, read him and all that. I think.
Well, I was being prayerful.
I think there's
I didn't say I felt a prompting.
Yeah.
Of anything.
But I think here's the delineation. Number one, I think most times we argue. I know in my household, right? The only times Nancy and I argue is when she thinks I'm wrong.
When is that?
And so it is really just trying to convince her that I'm right. But I think. Like when you look at the coin, and Jesus didn't want to offend, so he just went ahead and paid the tax that he didn't have to pay. I lay out an argument. I'm exempt from this tax, but so I don't offend, I'm going to pay this tax. Jesus could have said the same statement of like, I don't have to die because I haven't sinned, but I'm going to do it for you.
Oh, I love that. That's a great analogy.
And I think that is probably what this whole conversation kind of comes about. Are we having this conversation? Are we willing to offend? Are we willing to argue a position for their sake, not our sake. You know, and so when it becomes more about us, we are totally in the flesh.
Who am I trying to convince here? Sometimes I think we're trying to convince ourselves, because I've discovered as I've gotten older and I've engaged more and I've learned more and I'm more secure in my worldview and
testing your metals.
Yeah, it's been tested enough times that like I don't have an emotional like when I get into these. In fact, I can almost just like I settle in now and I can just kind of listen and be able to go, oh, okay, yeah, interesting. And they can throw barbs and stuff, and it just sounds it's kind of maybe frustrating, but you're kind of like, okay, I'm gonna wait. And it's just kind of like once you've heard a lot of it and you dealt with a lot of it. I see this with like somebody like Sean McDowell, right? He just kind of sits.
William
and
Lane
listens.
Craig.
And yeah, these guys aren't like they're just unflappable with this, and I see Jesus that way, and I think that's what you're getting at is like, who am I trying to convince here? I think sometimes we get so emotional. I'm trying to reconvince myself because it's so I'm
if
freaked
I'm
out
wrong,
with the
then
question.
I couldn't possibly end up figuring out. You know, my whole life is falling apart. I think a lot of times when people argue, they do care a lot about what the audience thinks, and it is hard in those moments to go, Lord, I want to care what you think, even if I lose this argument. Did I do it in a way that brings glory to you? Can I go back and learn more? Or should I come back humbly? What should I do in this circumstance?
And not to mention, there's also this feeling that we've created. And I'm not saying it's wrong. Some people are evangelists, and they have a compulsion to draw the close.
Yeah,
they want to go like, do you want to receive Christ right now?
Reap the harvest that
some
others plant and water.
Some people are forcing it like it's a sales job.
Yeah,
and I think we have to be careful when that push comes from me versus when it's clear that the heart of the person is yearning, and you need to just go, are you ready? Is this the day? And I think that takes a lot of discernment.
And are you ready to follow? Now, are you ready to repeat a prayer? You know, I mean, I think there's an aspect of the prayer
because, but he asked me because he just didn't know what to say. So
no, yeah.
So it's not.
I think we think we need to have them say this prayer.
Yeah, because if it's a sales pitch, then you need to give the last line of the sales pitch.
No.
Say it this way.
Ready to follow, you know, and he was, obviously.
It's an invitation to a relationship. It's an invitation to a life of worship. It's an invitation to receiving a gift. There's so many aspects to this that is so out of your own hands, you can't.
The other one is just when you mentioned that, it triggered in my head as far as Jesus saying, well, I don't have to die, but I'm going to anyway. I don't have to do lots of things, but if I do them, I'm glorifying God. If for me, it might be, like we talked about this, like I mentioned it, you have a casual way of being able to bring people into a conversation when we're out to lunch, or you're just naturally better at engaging someone from scratch. That takes me a while to do. That's harder for me to do.
Longer.
Yeah, I've learned to do it, but I like to go along with you. It's a different kind of evangelism, or just being friendly and being willing to open up for a spiritual conversation. I've learned from that. So that would be the area of sacrifice I would need to make for myself, would be to grow in that areas. Others, I feel like the opposite is true. Someone is asking a tough question, maybe some atheist guy, and they know that that's not what you're interested in, and they got you pegged. It may require you to go bring a friend that knows more about that subject, or to learn and sacrifice in your own growth, which is uncomfortable. I think sometimes God wants us to see that he's in control of whether people get saved or not, but he does want us to step out and get out of our comfort zones, so that way he gets the full glory. If someone else leads someone to the Lord and they're like, I don't know anything about like ancient biblical, but that's the conversation we had, and all of a sudden God showed up, or I don't really talk about it that much. And then in those moments, not that God can't use what your strengths are, you know that it's more God, not less, and it's more about God using stepping in those gaps and making you step out of your comfort zone. Because people ask me like, I don't really feel comfortable knocking on doors. Like, I've never enjoyed that experience until I started doing it.
Can I point something else out? I think that also when you get in that situation where you're asked that hard question, and I've coached the church. I coach people to say, I don't know. Let's go find out. One of the funny things is one of the groups I get that from that I've seen it effective is the Mormons. When you really work a Mormon and you start to really dig into their background and ask questions that are difficult for them, they will say, I don't know, you should ask my bishop.
Yeah.
Right? That is their trained response. Now, the difference is that they don't then go, and I'll go with you. Let's go ask our bishop now. They actually use it as a deflection to stop the conversation. I don't think we should be doing that. If you actually say, I don't know, we invite you to come and find out. Because here's what's happened for me. I've actually then gone to the wards or the stakes and sat down with a bishop, and they're like, "Why are you here? Why are you trying to evangelize on our property?" I'm like, No. Your missionaries told me to come ask you. And they're like, "Oh." And I had asked them their questions. You know what? When they finally got to the end of the questions, they said, "Well, go ask the apologists at the college." That was their out. And so at that point, where am I going to find the apologist? What college? Where?
You're going to
go
Utah?
To BYU to find out what's going on here? And so, again, deflection. I want to tell people, like, we're not going to do that at Olive Branch. Like, if you've got a legitimate question that people are asking, and I mean legitimate, I'm not going to answer.
And they sincerely want an answer.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer an insincere question. I mean, I can. I don't.
You can sacrifice to do so.
But when you mean insincere, you're thinking of a deflective question.
Right.
I'm just trying to shut you up and move on from.
Aren't you not supposed to judge as a Christian? You know, that people will say things like that.
Well, even questions that are legitimate questions, but they're being used as a way of like
shutting you down. Yeah.
As like, you're just one of those people. Oh, so you believe this and you believe that? Yeah. Are you really wanting me to answer those questions? You're not actually out for the answer. You just know these are the questions that you've been told, shut down evangelicals or whatever. And so that I would say that's an insincere question. So again, we can answer them. I haven't met too many questions that can't really be answered. And so there's that. I think that we want to invite people to consider, literally follow up, use the podcast. You see, one of the reasons we do this is so that you have a location to ask that question, and we will try to let you know, hey, we answered your question. If that was somebody's question you're asking for them, we would definitely let you know, because we want you to be able to engage in that way. And these are one of the training pieces and one of the ways we can help you out. You do not have to be afraid as you engage your friends and your neighbors and your coworkers with Jesus, the questions that they're going to ask. You don't have to be afraid of those. You can say, I don't know, but I know a place I can get an answer. Would you want to find that out with me? And then ask us. Like, send that email and throw that out there on the internet if you're daring. And that's what we're here for. That's one of the reasons this podcast exists.
Yeah, and I mean, and Matt went on too, was talking about the gospel being offensive, or we don't want to be offensive. And he used the word scandalizo or something that was a Greek, which means a stumbling block. And he kind of laid out 3 points of what that means. To entice someone to sin, causing someone to doubt or distrust, or to get aggravated and irritated. So again, when we're talking about being offensive with people, when we're talking, we kind of want to stay away from causing those types of things and being that kind of a stumbling block. In premarital counseling, we always talk about, when you as a couple argue, right, you can't have a scenario where one of you wins the argument and one of you loses the argument without both of you losing, So, you win as a team or you lose as a team. And I think that when it comes to being evangelistic or having conversations with somebody, we don't want to, if we win the argument and then they lose by either just getting so aggravated and irritated that it doesn't go anywhere,
and you become a blockhead.
Yeah, and it's not a totally unproductive conversation, or causing someone, discomfort. And I will say, discomfort is different. You can have conversations where people aren't comfortable, and that's okay, but they're not offended. You haven't become a stumbling block. Because I think God works in the midst of discomfort, right. And so again, just be prayerfully mindful as you're having these conversations about where are they at, and paying attention to their body language, paying attention to their part of the conversation. Are they pulling back? Are they engaging more? And I think part of any good communicator is learning that art of drawing them into the conversation, not shutting them out of the conversation, because you don't have an audience if nobody's listening.
True. So I want to move on, because we don't have to talk a long time on it, but there's this weird thing about Jesus telling Peter, "Go throw a hook in the lake, and you're going to get a fish with a
two drachma.
With a two
One for me, one
a
for you,
shekel
or two. Yeah, it's like a couple
in its mouth, which is worth 4. It's
worth 4.
it's
Yeah, that's what
called
it is. Yeah,
there's some name for it, and I forget what it was.
pays for enough for
It's called
both
a stater.
Jesus and Peter.
A stater is a silver coin worth 4 drachmas.
I know they're
approximately
weights,
one
right?
shekel.
A talent
shekel is a
was
weight.
a monetary unit worth about 20 years' wages.
A day's wage.
Oh, I'm on the wrong page.
Or 20 years' wages. Okay, yeah.
You're not up
Days
to
wages.
code on your ancient biblical
yeah, no,
currencies.
woo, you know.
I was in chapter 18. Sorry.
I always have to look them up.
So this is interesting to me because, like, what's the fun when Matt let it out of the bag that we read commentators? Oh man! But what's funny is a lot of commentators on this section, they just go like, "Well, was he just telling a parable?" They don't even commit to like this is a real thing, and I don't know what the big deal is. Like, why in the world are they like freaked out that the fish might have money in it? Like your thoughts on that? Like, what?
Well, I just think if people want to fish with really expensive bait, I mean, they're gonna use the lure that works. But I don't know if it's necessarily weird to think that you might catch fish with something that's shiny. But even then,
Exactly.
Well, yeah, because we do it now with lures and things. But even then, if you don't, this is God saying, like, to me, it's like, well, I don't have to pay this tax because this is my father's house, and I can exempt whoever I want. But just to show you that the whole world belongs to my father, I'm going to do this thing to show you money can come from any source I want it to pay this off, right? So I think it's also just reestablishing that even though I could take offense, I'm not gonna. And just to show you that I have the power to do this, right? And I think that's the kind of meekness that you would see. I know it doesn't sound like that to me, but to me, it's like when somebody's very powerful and chooses to let the offense go, that's a credit to their ability to go, like, I don't need to be winning every fight just because I have the ultimate authority. If it's going to get in the way of someone seeing my father, but to show you that I have that authority, here's how I'm going to pay for you and for me.
Yeah, so let me enhance my confusion here, because some of these commentators that I'm reading, you know, you get to Jesus calming the storm or walking on water.
They want to
they're just like,
despiritualize
no,
it.
they're just like, nope, definitely, awesome. But
so
you get to this and they're like, well, you know, it doesn't say that he went out and caught a fish with a coin in the mouth. Maybe it's just like
That's
a
weird.
saying. And I'm like, so a fish with a coin in his mouth, that's where you draw your line. Like, Jesus walking on water, calming storms, boom, Jesus is God. Fish mouth, and it's because Herodotus has an actual similar story. There's legends, a couple of different little legends out there about fish with money in their mouth. Well, I was reading this commentator that actually...
I hope it was a big mouth bass because they could hold a lot more.
I'm holding out the guy's going to pay my taxes this week that was the same way.
Let me read it this way. Michael Green, he's like, what did we make of the miracle of the coin in the fish's mouth? Many people have taken it to be either a folk tale, Herodotus had a similar story, or as a vivid form of saying that a day's fishing will solve tax problems. And he's like, however, the story is far from impossible. Again, he says, like, hey, fishermen all know fish are attracted to shiny objects. Yep. This is a silver coin. It's going to shimmer as it goes down. He's like, why couldn't it have pounced on a silver drachma which fell from someone's hand into the waters of the lake? You know, once in the fish's mouth, it had to stay there for and he then says the musk fish, which is the main species found in the Sea of Galilee, has an overdeveloped mouth into which small fish can run for safety, and then he'll spit them back out after the marauding cannibal fish attacks. And so he himself has placed a silver coin larger than these drachmas in their mouths, and they fit comfortably.
Part of it too is what was the date on that coin, because it could have fell out of Jonah's pocket.
You know,
wrong sea, but good
wrong
try.
fish.
That was the Mediterranean. This is the Lake of Galilee. So and so that to me, it's like what I find funny is that it's almost like the mundanity of the miracle is what's throwing people off.
I don't know.
And I heard this used many years ago, and it's the difference between like, oh, we're good with the supernatural, but then there's something that is actually a category that's been argued by like Hugh Ross and some others called the supranatural. It's not supernatural in the sense of like someone calming a storm or creating bread out of nothing, right? Bread out of more bread. But the supranatural is when a natural event occurs in a very, what we would call coincidental situation. But it's like, but it would be like God calling his shot. You know, Babe Ruth,
Like Babe
pointing
Ruth.
and boom, he hits it right. Loan sharks. But the
Greg and his terrible jokes.
but what's interesting,
See, not just 4 minutes in. Sometimes an hour.
so that was awesome. The supernatural is actually expressed in one of those ways is Elijah's up on the Mount Carmel, and he's having that fight out with the
Baal
prophets
worshipers.
of Baal. Right, and they're calling on him, and nothing's happening. And Elijah's like, fill that thing over with water over and over and over again. And then he prays to God, and boom, fire comes from the sky. It's such a weird way of putting it. It's lightning. Lightning comes out of the sky, hits this thing, and lights it on fire. And then what's the next scene? He looks out, and he sees there's a cloud off in the distance. And he says, okay, rain's coming. Now, what scientists have looked at that scene, and they go, oh, we know what this phenomenon is. That it's called a bolt from the blue, that there is an static electric discharge that builds up in front of a storm head when there's been an intense amount of dry heat and dryness. And it will cause lightning to strike where there is no clouds. And so then shortly after, the rain will begin. So they call it a bolt from the blue. Well, what makes this bolt from the blue a miracle and not just a natural event, why it's a supernatural event, is because it was called. He calls upon God, and at that moment it strikes. You can call it all the natural you want. You can explain it naturally away. It's the fact that it's called, is the fact that Jesus says it will be there, and it was there, that makes it beyond just a natural event. And it's beyond a coincidence. Coincidences occur, but coincidences are statistically coincidental.
This is very unlikely
This is-
statistically.
For him to say it, call it, and it to happen,
All in that exact moment, at that exact time they were asked to pay the taxes.
that would put it at a supernatural level. And the brain, the information to understand what it's seeing, that's supernatural. That is beyond the natural. So that would be a
Cool.
differentiation.
That's a
So
cool
just
category.
kind of an interesting thought.
All right. So, do you want to get to the question?
Let's hit as many as we can.
Yes. All right. We'll go through it. And so some of these are going to be conversations, but
No.
all right.
Just kidding.
So number 13. And these are questions that were given to us from our 6th and 7th graders at the Olive Branch
Yay.
Christian Academy School.
And we're still going through them.
And we're still going through them. We've
Lots
got
of
quite a few to
questions.
go through. So, number 1, why is God letting the Israel and Palestine war continue? Why doesn't he just stop it? Why is he letting it go on? And it's been going on for a long time.
I don't for
I
the
think
24-hour news cycle.
My
I was kidding.
my answer is always, I'm not God. I don't know. That's first, because we're asking a why question.
Yeah, I mean,
And-
you can ask that almost of many questions. Why doesn't God stop something immediately that I perceive to be terrible going on, and by all means might be terrible from what we can see? And sometimes God delays justice or judgment for particular reasons that we don't always know, and it's difficult to know. but he does demonstrate that he understands putting himself under those circumstances himself by coming and dying on the cross on our behalf. So Jesus, you might not know why a terrible event is occurring, but you know who would be able to speak into that situation if you trusted him, and who will ultimately tell everybody why those things happen. And who's even demonstrated that his own version of being treated harshly for the sake of relating to us. So.
And I'm just going to take one simple step further. It is just, we don't know why God is doing it. We can't say it's prophecy. We can't say it's this stuff. I can tell you that it fulfills an aspect of a prophecy. With Jesus in Matthew 24 has gone up on this Mount of Olives. He's finished visiting the temple. He then says these words, and you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. This is one of the wars and many wars and rumors of wars that have happened, and they happen. And so is this a special setup situation? It's not for us to say, but it is predicted that there will be wars and rumors of wars, and that's nations are going to rise against nations, kingdoms against kingdoms, and these things are going to happen. But that's not the end. That's just something that Jesus says it's just going to happen.
The other thing is to get caught up into, why was this particular war the one that's going to bring the end? And the real point of that is to draw close to the Lord and say, look, there's going to be an end. Just make sure you stay faithful.
I actually think the war that's going to start all the ends of the wars will be like some guy who gets angry at somebody else on a freeway here in California.
The other thing though is the butterfly effect. The other thing that's also to consider is that people do have free will, and because we have free will, there's the option to do what God is not pleased to do, and that has consequences as well.
Yeah. And you can find the war that starts all wars here in Corona, road rage, in Coronians 9:1. So
thank you.
Yeah. You get that? 91?
Yeah,
the freeway. Oh, yeah, it's clever.
Is it First Coronians?
First Coronians? All right. So another question.
15 Coronians.
15 Coronians.
Can a soul be destroyed? If so, what will you see?
So
what will I see?
this is biblical language,
yeah,
because Jesus does say that
the passage that talks about destroying the soul and the body.
Yeah, do not fear the one who can destroy body, but fear him who can destroy both body and hell, or body and soul in hell. And so, yes, it can be destroyed, but the word destroy means something different than completely annihilate or disintegrate. It means to break it down so it's unusable. So it would be thrown out. When something's destroyed, it's unfixable, and that's the idea. And so a destroyed soul is not going to look much different than a normal sinner who just keeps sinning, growing. I think if you really want to see somebody who's got a destroyed
Matthew
soul,
10.
You're going to then look around at some of the most broken people in the world who have rejected God, who've gotten into drug addictions, gotten into horrible things. Look at Hitler; he was a destroyed soul. Look at Mao. Look at these dictators. Look at somebody who is an abuser. And just won't let go. It's a twisting in on itself. It's a person who's selfish and fixated only on themselves. So that would be a destroyed soul, biblically speaking.
Yeah, there's also a difference between destruction and annihilation.
Yeah.
You can have a destroyed car. It no longer works. It sits on the side of the road. It's there. It exists. It's just not useful anymore. So the idea of something being destroyed doesn't mean it completely disappears from existence. So right. I think that's the confusion a lot of people have when they think God's going to destroy a soul. It won't exist anymore.
And in that passage, the word hell is Gehenna. And what we have to remember is Gehenna was the dump. It was where they took their trash.
It's where you took things that we can't use anymore.
You can't use it anymore is the only reason it goes to the trash.
So if you think of unusable as destroyed, then you have the right track. If you think of it as annihilated completely, then you wouldn't put that in a dump. It would just seep to not exist.
All right. And does God feel when people get hurt? Like if you get kicked in the shin, can he feel that?
Oh, that's almost like Avatar feel, right? Like the movie Avatar. Where
what?
In the movie Avatar, they have a body outside themselves, and then they're tethered to the body, and their real body is in some kind of, I don't know, like some kind of suit. They're sitting in that weird aqua chamber, and all their mind's hooked to it. So when you hurt that body, they feel it. If someone hurts this body, they react to it. And that isn't how it works in Christianity at all. God feels empathy the way, probably to a greater degree than we do. Like if someone's hurt, I've been hurt, so I know how that feels. So that would be the relatable. I wouldn't say that he's experiencing the same pain simultaneously to you like an avatar would.
He knows the pain and he knows that you're experiencing it, but he's not himself experiencing it.
And I would say this is a problem a lot of times with just when we talk about what's called transhumanism or we talk about identity, is this idea that I have to have the identical pattern in order to relate to the experience. The way human beings learn really well is called vicarious learning. It's one of the more profitable ways humans learn is by watching something, being able to relate enough to go, I know that it's not good. This is the better course of action. Or I know that person's hurting and I know the course of action because I've experienced similar experiences. You don't have to mimic the same process of destruction for you and for that person in order for you to relate. It's just something to keep in mind because relatability is wider than we think it is. We don't want to shorten the ability to relate. It's like, unless you have my exact same experience, you can't relate to me. That's not necessarily true of any human being. So
now, God is the only being that knows exactly how you see things and knows exactly how you see it right and how you see it wrong. He knows how you felt. He knows how you're feeling, but he's not experiencing it as you.
Right.
So there's a very big difference there. And it's because you are not God and God is not you. Even though he is with you and in you and through you, he's not experiencing it as you. Does that make sense? That's a little complicated, but it's an interesting question.
I like these questions in terms of relationships, right? So moms had enough bruises to know what it feels like when their baby's hurting, and they probably feel pain in a way that's even more painful sometimes for the mom than the baby, right? So it's just like we're not talking about one-on-one identical experiences. We're talking about relational experiences. And so I would even say a mother's concern for her child, it could be even more painful than the pain that the kid is experiencing at that time because they see more.
Well, yeah. I mean, how many times have one of my kids had something happen to them and they're like, yeah, no big deal. And I'm going like, oh my gosh,
you don't know.
That psychologically is going to haunt you and crush you. And I see where it's going. And sure enough, it starts simmering and you're like, I think there are wounds that we receive and pains that we get that God quote feels in the sense of like
on a greater scale,
on a bigger scale. He goes like, oh, I know that, but then he also knows how ultimately it works out. And so I don't think that God feels it in the way that we're talking about it, physical pain. But okay, let's move on this one.
All right. When Jesus was on earth, did he appear to people in different forms? Why didn't Jesus' disciples recognize him when he told them to cast their net on the other side? I'll even extend that and say, why did they not, recognize him when he was walking with them
road
on
to
the road to Emmaus, and then he revealed who he was?
I think the road to Emmaus is more difficult than any of the other instances. When you got Mary sees him in the garden, and she's like, "Oh, it's the gardener." But I think if you were not expecting to see the dead person that you thought's body's gone, you're going to make assumptions. And if you've been crying and you're bleary-eyed, you're not going to see very straight. In the case of them, Jesus walking on the shore, they're out in the water. He's probably not super like crystal clear in like, oh, we see this guy. They're far enough out. He has to swim back in. So they're in the deeper water. That's far enough that they can hear Jesus, but they can't make out his features. So that's also not one that's as difficult to explain. That the one we're seeing or hearing from is, again, Jesus. There's visual distortion, there's echo distortion. It's not like they were just like, oh yeah, Jesus is just going to walk up and start talking to us. But the third one, I think the Emmaus Road is the more difficult one. Because in this case, it actually says that he is...
He kind of reveals to them.
I think it says he actually disguises himself.
That is the one place, though, when you hear those questions. If you can go back in time in history to any point, where would you want to go? And I'm like, that's where I want to be. I would love to be on that road to Emmaus, and Jesus is like pointing to himself from the beginning to that point.
So here's the thing.
Hear the whole story.
Let me read the text so that we get it clear, because there's a difference here. That a lot of people go like, oh, Jesus made himself look different. Actually, here's what it says. That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus. This is in Luke chapter 24, verse 13. About 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking to each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. This is not about Jesus looking different. This is about their, either supernaturally they were kept from being able to notice him, recognize him, or something about how they saw was keeping them from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation you're holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem who doesn't know these things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, the man who was a prophet, mighty indeed in word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers," and it goes on to describe this. And so then talk about that. And some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it, and women said they didn't see it, or they said he had risen, but they didn't see him. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, slow of heart to believe the prophets, all the prophets spoken, was not necessary that Christ would suffer." And then this is the part you were talking about. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the scriptures of the things concerning himself. And then they draw near the village, and he acted as if he was going to go further. It's almost, I like how one person said it. It says the resurrected Jesus is more playful than anything, because there's no stress. He doesn't have to be worried anymore. He's having fun. He's engaging. He's playing with people. He's hanging out with them. He's like, it's like kind of like hide and seek.
Fun.
Yeah, Jesus does a lot of this kind of stuff. I think he does, and
Playful, joyful.
Yeah, and so he acted as if he was going further. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us. It's evening." So he went in to stay, and when it was at the table, he took bread and blessed and broke it, and their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. Again, it's focused on their eyes, not Jesus's actual appearance. So I would argue, no, Jesus does not necessarily look different. There's something about their eyes being incapable of recognizing him.
Yeah, I'm just hearing
Who was
echoes.
it whose scales fell from their eyes?
Paul.
That's what I was thinking. And that was on the road to Damascus, right? So, again, his eyes couldn't see.
The playful part here is just the constant references to eyes reminds me of the eyes that were open because they saw the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, and now they see God and they realize, oh, life has been restored. And then it's
like they finally get
the
life
fulfillment.
comes in focus.
Life comes in.
Everything looks like trees.
Everything was dead.
Oh, now I get it.
And I'm living in death. And then, oh my gosh, you're Jesus. And it's like my eyes are open, and now I see.
Oh, there's a lot of healing of eyes, and
Yeah. So I think that's as specific for what God's trying to do, but it's also very much like, hey, watch this. This is fun. You're going to see me. That one is different.
All right. Next question. If in heaven there are streets of gold, how do we know that?
The Bible tells me so.
Yeah, Revelation, right? The street.
Well, that's where it says that.
That's where the phrases come from.
But it's not really like a literal, right, where the streets are paved with gold. It's more of just
I don't think we have any
our most valuable gemstones and things are going to just be.
This goes back to temple language. So the temple language, gold is the holy places metal. It's gold is found only in the holy of holies, and so this is saying that the heaven is the holy of holies itself. You're not getting bronze, and you're not getting the other silver. You're getting the gold, and the gold is that center part of the holy of holies. And so we need to remember that there's something connected with heaven and gold. In fact, if you go back to the book of Genesis and you start reading about a Garden of Eden, there's this weird little passage in here,
Revelation 21.
in Genesis 2, that says that after he's finished it, he says, "The Lord God planted a garden," this is verse 8 of chapter 2, "in the east, and he put a man in whom he formed. And out of the ground the Lord made every tree to spring up, and the tree of," and then all this stuff. Then he talks about the river flowing out of Eden to water the garden, divides into 4 rivers, the Pishon. The name of the first of the Pishon, it is that one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bedlam and onyx stone are there. These are all the stones of heaven. These are all the stones of Eden.
Yeah, you pick it up in Revelation. This is the reverse image that you see here in Revelation. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with every kind of jewel. The first jasper, second sapphire, agate, and then emerald. Then it says the fifth onyx. So you have some of the same kind of gems. Mm-hmm. The glass, it's like glass transparent gold. So the street's like paved with gold, but it's transparent gold. So what you get is a lot of things that are angelic are kind of transparent and translucent. They glow and they're shiny. So this is a perfect picture of the reestablishing of Eden symbolically. So from bookend to bookend, he's recreating that even better than it was in its glory.
As difficult as it is,
we want to literalize it, I guess.
Yeah, but also there is weird things like NDE, people who have reported near-death experiences that have claimed they have stepped into the presence of heaven, and they will describe it as like gold.
Physical places,
and it's they because look, we're trying to use physical words to describe heavenly things, and that's all we can do. That's why the temple and the tabernacle was made of physical objects with very precious. This is precious. This is the most precious stuff. Gold was the most precious material, and so in that sense, you're right. It's like the most expensive, that kind. But this is, again, it's most precious because that's not precious, but like precious in the sense of this is so holy. It's so rare, and that's why all the ancient worlds used gold in their holiest places, because of the rarity of it. It was very special, very precious, and so you don't want just anybody touching it. Easily malleable, all that kind of stuff. But
in the Garden of Eden, it was the Pishon River that carried the gold. Not to mention the other two rivers, Dijon and Poupon. Right,
the mustard river.
Golden mustard.
Yeah, I don't want to poop on that joke, but that was pretty bad.
That was pretty bad.
It's not heaven if it's mustard. I'm not a fan.
But yes, you got to get that groaner in so that we can move on to the next question.
That way you can catch
How
up.
did Elijah and Enoch earn eternal life? Faithfulness. That's what I say.
I don't think they earned eternal life.
Did not earn it.
So I struggle with the phrase only because I think what you're meaning to say, if I were to hear you, is how did they get to go to heaven? Because in the Old Testament, they're the only two off the top of my head that I can remember have the honor of being taken into heaven. Everyone else who dies in the Old Testament went to Sheol. So they had this honorary position. There is
debate that Moses was. So
Moses is the one that's debatable because his body's left here, right? And where did he go? So does it say Moses or does it say Enoch? Enoch's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Enoch walked with God
and was no more. And so the idea is somehow they were with him. They had a special position of authority with him that he was like, I guess you wouldn't call it authority. You would say it was a position of privilege that they're like, you know what? I'm going to pick you up, take you up here with me. The rest of you guys kind of got to wait in Sheol. So things are different in the Old Testament way of doing things than they are now. So if there are certain honorable positions where God was holding them like they do people who die now. So God went down, this is what I see in Scripture, he took everyone out of Abraham's bosom, and they're with the Lord. He's securing them and holding them, and they're in this kind of position of being with him in this unique fellowship right now. And that's what these two people experienced prior to Christ's return. So now every time one dies in Christ, this is what they're currently experiencing, what Enoch and Elijah would have experienced as well. Moses, I hadn't heard. Is that something somewhere in the Old New Testament that mentions that he's in heavens? I know he's now. But prior to, I don't see anything in the Old Testament.
It's the argument that's made that the two witnesses.
The two witnesses are also could be Enoch and Elijah as well.
I argue they're Enoch and Elijah.
Yeah, if you hold to that eschatology, I would go with Enoch and Elijah because it fits the biblical Old Testament pattern.
They need to die.
They haven't died. Yeah.
But on the Mount of Transfiguration, it was Moses and Elijah.
Because they represent the law and the prophets.
Right. Okay. So the point is that Elijah is the representation of the prophets. Enoch is a representation of the nation. So you have a Jew and a Gentile. I mean, because Enoch's not Jewish. Enoch, and so the point is...
predates Judaism.
Yeah, here is the one...
and Jewish people.
What is the thing that Enoch does? He walks with God. This language is picked up in the New Testament as walk in the Spirit. Walk by the Spirit. Keep in step with the Spirit. And this is the idea, then you will live in the eternal kingdom.
Yeah, we
are doing this right now, is how the New Testament would express it. We are living like Enoch, only not fully yet.
This is where you get a lot of people hoping that they have that destiny. So there was some hope. They didn't exactly know, Jesus is going to come and then he's going to take everybody to heaven. They just kind of like, God's going to resurrect, and hopefully in the end, we're all with him somehow if we keep honoring Yahweh in the Old Testament. These two people got there, so maybe something like that, and that's what they were looking for. Jesus comes along and explains that, and the apostles explain what that is in more detail for us.
All right. Does the Bible contradict itself because it says that Methuselah was the oldest person to live in the Bible, but he died before his father? How could he be younger than his father? Or older than his father?
Because Enoch walked with God.
Ah.
That's not actually a question.
That's not actually a question, but yeah, because Enoch was his father and he didn't die. All right, so did the Big Bang actually happen?
So I'm going to go with Hugh Ross on this one. Hugh Ross is a Christian astrophysicist who has been...
Could we go with the Bare Naked Ladies on this?
The song?
Yeah, the song.
What?
That was the theme song.
Yeah, I got to make sure you clarify.
Well, we're talking to
It's called the Big Bang song. They wrote a song called the Big Bang Theory.
Okay, good.
Just wanted your face to look like what?
I
He
know.
doesn't know it's a
Yeah, I
band.
know.
He doesn't know it's a band.
No, I know it's a band. I know
okay.
the band really well. I
Oh,
just
okay.
was like, I didn't know that they wrote that song.
Oh.
So I was like rolling through my Rolodex of that band's song and
okay.
thinking that we're talking to a certain grade level that... Anyway. All right, so thanks, Brent.
Yeah.
I would go with Hugh Ross right now. And Hugh Ross, who is a Christian, he's an astrophysicist. He's very, very well trained. He was part of the teams that started doing the studies of radiographic background stuff and just all kinds of things.
Astrophysics.
There is more evidence scientifically for the Big Bang having occurred than most theories that we actually hold to. So I would say it's scientifically extremely viable. Not to mention, theologically, it fits with Christianity because there is a beginning to the universe. There is a
God
beginning.
spoke and bang.
Yeah, there's a beginning of time. There's a beginning of space. All of these things the Bible predicted. Prior to Jewish interpretation, we had things called cycles, which was the belief that the universe was eternal and it just kept rotating through cycles of
like
life,
the Wheel
death.
of Time.
Yeah, Wheel of Time, life, death, life, death, resurrection stuff. But it was all based on
Karma.
spring, the cycles of the seasons.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so
Death and renewal.
they weren't the same as what we're talking about. And so they actually, even the Mayans and the Aztecs, they all had these same things. What's weird is the Bible said there was a beginning. Atheists, all the way up until the advent of this discovery in science, argued the universe was infinite. Einstein even tried to posit a fake variable in his original equations because he didn't like that it was showing there was a beginning. And if he put this constant in that he created, it would it evened everything out so the universe was infinite. But it was a fakie, and he says it was the biggest mistake he ever made. And so this is so regarded as clear. They've had to move on to other arguments to try to get around a beginning to the universe. So if you're a Christian, you don't have to be afraid of it. It is a powerful tool to say, look, the Bible got it right.
I had to look up his name, but I don't know how to pronounce this. But his name is Lamarche? Lamarche?
Oh yeah, Lamartre.
Yeah, he was the first. I know there was an ordained Catholic priest who came up with the first theory.
Yeah, it was actually a couple different people, but he's
one that's credited with the creating of the Big Bang Theory. So he didn't see it as a compromise to his faith. He just thought of it as a way that God did it.
In fact, the vast majority of scientists, when the theory came out, called it creationism in disguise.
Yeah.
It's the church in the recent years that has been the ones that have thrown it out.
But they associate if you buy into the Big Bang, you have to buy into all of the evolutionary.
And that's not true.
belief
You
systems.
do not have to do that.
Yeah.
In fact, Hugh Ross doesn't. He believes in a progressive creation that God acted to create. Then he let things do what they needed to do, and at the moment he brought an extinction creation event again and brought new things, and so he did this, and that's what he believes you're reading in Genesis chapter 1. So it's a fascinating bunch of stuff. But you got me on the science thing, and I answered as quick as I could. Hey, you may have other science questions. You may have your own questions. We'd love to hear from you. And let us know. Drop us a line. You can email us at rabbittrail@obcc.church. That's rabbittrail@obcc.church. We're glad you joined with us today. We hope that you learned something, maybe even kind of deepened your knowledge about the Lord and about his world. And we're just glad you joined with us. Thanks for joining us. We see you next time, and God bless you.
And in light of the last question, bang, chakalaka.
Bye.